I'm sorry about the lighting. This is how I teach. I'm an archaeologist, so I'm always teaching from pictures and slides. This is my happy place now. I'm going to start from an observation that I had in the spring, which is that there's, especially on the side of NASA, there's been an increasing emphasis on language around the idea of space sustainability. Maybe you've noticed this too, where we've seen, for example, the publication of the first volume of a space sustainability strategy by them. We saw calls for proposals for research on sustainability on the lunar surface and also in low Earth orbit. So that's really interesting. They're hiring a space sustainability director, this kind of thing. So lots is going on there. However, at the same time, I couldn't help but notice, and this may be a little provocative to those of you who are really interested in operations on the moon and elsewhere, that anytime there is an environmental impact statement that has to do with space activities, they stop as soon as launch happens. And what happens after that is just like, whatever. And I would like to put the idea out there in your minds that perhaps a better way of thinking about what we're doing in space is not to think about it as terribly different from Earth. In fact, to think of it really the same as Earth. And the lessons that we've learned here on Earth are ones that we should apply to our activities in the future in space. And I'm going to do this through an unusual lens because, again, I am an archaeologist thinking about heritage in space. Because I think that this might be a way that I can appeal to your emotions a little bit, because I'm betting if you're here at this thing, you care about space and you care about all the achievements that have happened, and that you have a soft emotional spot in your heart for that. And so I'm gonna play on that a little bit. So what I'm gonna do is show you some items and some places in space that maybe you will feel happy feelings about. So for example, here we're looking at a display in the Air and Space Museum in Washington, where we're looking at, well, a model of the Vanguard series of satellites that did not make it to orbit. But the oldest object that is still in orbit is Vanguard 1, that grapefruit-sized satellite with the antennas coming out of it. And that has been in orbit since 1958. It's kind of remarkable, right? And we know exactly where it is. We could track it, and we are tracking it. Also in this display, really interesting, the only object associated with Sputnik that still exists at all, never mind on the planet, because it burned up in re-entry, that was an arming key that at the last moment before launch was removed to set its power systems working. So these are really the origins of human spaceflight. And then, of course, I have to show you something like Apollo 11, Tranquility Base, right? And the fact that it is a landscape that has now been altered by human activity over a 22-hour period by Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin. Well, guess what? An archaeologist has mapped it and figured out all the items that were left behind there. There were 106 objects left behind. You might say, didn't we know it was left behind? And the answer is no, we didn't, because there were things left behind that weren't expected to be left behind, like fecal containers, urine containers, boot covers for EVA suits that were thrown out the door right before liftoff, because the idea was you brought all these new rock samples on board. Nobody's ever tried to lift off of the moon before. Throw that stuff out the door. You don't need it. So you might be able to see Beth O'Leary. She did the study between 1999 and 2002, the toss zone, the hatched area that you can see outside the lunar module there. And so this is actually an archaeological idea, a toss zone, a midden, or a trash pile. Well, there's one on the moon. Cool. Well, Beth worked with the California State Historic Preservation Officer, and they actually listed these 106 objects as state historic resources right here in Sacramento. So these are actually considered to be part of the heritage of the state of California because the technology was developed here. They've also been listed by the states of New Mexico, Hawaii, Washington, and New York. So there's an idea that these places claim them because scientific development and innovation happened within their borders, and they're proud of it. There are objects on the moon that you might not expect. Maybe some of you know this, but this is Charlie Duke, one of the Apollo 16 astronauts, left a portrait of his family in their backyard in Houston in a plastic baggie on the moon. There is a memorial to deceased colleagues from the Apollo 15 mission with a small titanium sculpture called Fallen Astronaut and a paper card written with all the names of the people, the astronauts and cosmonauts who are known to have died by 1971 when this was installed. So this is a way in which we make spaces in space more human, and they also are moments of innovation because nobody had ever thought to do these things in space before. I might also point out that we can think of these places as landscapes, archaeological landscapes. Here you're looking at the Perseverance or Mars 2020 archaeological landscape with the different parts of its entry, descent, and landing package strewn across the Jezero crater. You may be familiar with this image if you were following Ingenuity. So about a year after landing, Perseverance, the rover, actually spotted from about 500 meters its back shell and parachute lying in the distance. And the engineers at JPL sent Ingenuity, the little drone helicopter, which, by the way, had a piece of the original Wright Flyer wing inside of it. Did you know that? A 1 centimeter square of the fabric of the wing. That's on Mars. To document this. They were doing an engineering autopsy, but I love this because this is documenting a site of historic American engineering. I'm actually working to document this according to a historic American engineering record that is going to be deposited with the National Park Service, and hopefully they will put it in the Library of Congress, which would make it the first human heritage anywhere off the Earth documented to federal standards because of this photography, because we have such a clear view of its current state, so that we can compare it to, if we go back robotically or with humans, we can go back and see what happened to this site over time, like good archaeologists. Here are some other bits and pieces that I discovered strewn across the landscape in other Ingenuity photos. You can see those little metal bits. Those are from the exploded descent stage. We also have this kind of stuff on Earth. So here we have the spacecraft graveyard. And I do want you all to think a little bit about the fact that we can't keep deorbiting things into the atmosphere indefinitely because heavy metals have been discovered up there now. We have the proof that this is having an impact. It doesn't just disappear completely. So this is the text about that. I can come back to it. Anybody seen WALL-E? Probably if you have kids, you've seen WALL-E. They actually thought of this idea of linking heritage and environmental thought together at the same time already. So this is the spacecraft that's bringing a plant back to the human craft that's way out in the cosmos to say, hey, you can come back to Earth and look at Earth's low Earth orbit, completely cluttered with satellite debris. And immediately then it flies past an Apollo site with the rover and a flag and causes a billboard to light up for the Walmart kind of company that runs everything, outlet coming soon on the moon. So I just want to say, if you think about that heritage that I saw, and by the way, when you saw this image and you went, ugh, then you're already thinking the way I want you to think. That is to say that you're already considering these places to be landscapes worth thinking about, worth preserving, worth paying attention to, worth treating the way we treat them on Earth. And that might color your thinking going forward. This is how heritage can be an entry point to environmental sustainability going forward. I'm out of time, so I'll stop there, but we can talk more in the questions. Thank you.
Blew us all away with the focus. Yeah, start. Anyone? Okay.
This is really interesting. It has a lot more value than you might think in terms of there are scientists who look for anomalous artifacts on the surface of moons and planets as evidence of potential extraterrestrial visits that we've had. And so understanding that it's not, but it's actually an Apollo remnant or a rover remnant is actually very helpful.
It's what archaeologists do. It's what we're here for. Happy to serve.
Yeah. So we've got an amazing list over here of all the countries that have launch capacity. Have you put a thought, or is there starting to be consensus of how these various countries or ethos, these systems of thought, view this heritage concept? Because right now I see the BNL sign, I'm like, ugh, but I could certainly see other people saying, oh, well, that means we got to the moon.
Here's the issue, right? The Outer Space Treaty says that nobody has any jurisdiction or sovereignty over any territory, right? That means the United States can't protect an Apollo site. Those listings that I talked about by California and the other states, they have no legal force whatsoever. The federal government continues to own the Apollo artifacts that are at those sites, but they have no control over protecting the landscape, the footprints, for example. Those can't be protected. So I've argued, this is more than 10 years ago in space policy, that we need an international treaty that specifically regards heritage in space and that protects things that are important. Not everything is equally important. So like the rocket bodies that were crashed on the moon, or the Rangers might not be as important as the Surveyors, might not be as important as the Apollos, might not be as important as Apollo 11. There are going to be levels of that, but that's a way we can talk about that stuff. But if we can talk about protecting heritage on the moon, can't we talk about protecting environments on the moon? Even though it's abiotic, it still has systems. It's a dynamic place. It's constantly changing, and when we go there, we at least interfere in some way with that. Before we do that, we have the opportunity now to think about it. That's what the argument I would make. And I know that a lot of you are like, but I want to go, I want to do those things. Fine, just think about how you're going to do it. That's all I would argue.
Is the protection of, I was just on a panel last week with Michelle Hanlon from For All Mankind, and they are a permanent observer for the UN Committee on Outer
Coppius, yeah.
Coppius. But just kind of wondering from a wedge issue, is protecting the 100+ some sites of human activity on the moon to preserve them for future human heritage, does that lead to concepts and norms which could protect other areas?
Sure. I think so, but I think
I guess the question is which is the best start?
I think it's possible to do it without saying we're only talking about the moon. We know that we have something on Titan, right? We have things on Venus. We have things out of the solar system that are human heritage, right? The Voyagers, the Pioneers, right? Those are incredible instruments and objects. Also something like Hubble Space Telescope. These are all different contexts in space, but space is already governed as a kind of a blanket territory at the moment, right? So we can have a territory that says it's possible to protect things. In fact, the Antarctic Treaty already does this. That's international territory. So there are models here on Earth for ways we can do this too. I know I'm over my time. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Okay, we'll talk later. Thank you.